Sometimes history moves far more rapidly than people expect, including people who are leading protagonists in the development of that history. And it's sometimes more rapidly than people wish that it would move. The case of what happened at the BRICS summit shows the way developments are speeding up on a strategic level in a way that was unforeseen by most people. Now we have a development where in less than 2 months after the conclusion of that summit, the very existence of the BRICS and the future of the global South and the global majority is actually going to be put in question in the elections in Argentina, the presidential elections of October 22nd. Here's why. There are 3 candidates who each have about a third of the vote. 2 of the 3, I'm speaking about Javier Milei and Patricia Bullrich, are both openly on the record for pulling Argentina out of the BRICS, even before it actually joins on January 1st, 2024. The third candidate, Sergio Massa, who is also the economics minister of the current government, whatever his other shortcomings, will at least stay in the BRICS. Now, what's going on is that the IMF and the international banks in the City of London and Wall Street have launched all-out financial warfare through their hitmen to destroy Argentina, to do a number of things, to make it impossible for anyone connected to this government to win the elections. They have unleashed inflation, extremely high interest rates, 120%, massive capital flight, tremendous poverty in the population. And their intention is to make of Argentina a bloody example. First of all, to weaken it so that it will not join the BRICS. That will open a flank against its neighbor Brazil, one of the 5 founding members of the BRICS, and make it a bloody example for the whole world so that any of the nations, 30 or more, that are currently thinking of joining the BRICS will get the message. If you try to leave or break with our bankrupt system, we will wipe you off the map. Now, therefore, the battle for Argentina is rapidly becoming the battle for the BRICS. You just heard Lyndon LaRouche speaking in 2002 in Mexico, in Saltillo, and he made the point that the time to change this system is now. And he was right. 20 years earlier, José López Portillo, then president of Mexico, spoke before the United Nations General Assembly on October 1st, 1982, and he stated that the place is here and the time is now to stop the slide into a new medieval dark age and replace it with a new paradigm. They were both right. Lyndon LaRouche has frequently emphasized that the key to victory under conditions of crisis is to win over enough people who can think and who can plan out policy so that they have the required concepts available when the proverbial S hits the proverbial fan, as it is now doing. Now, LaRouche explained this with great clarity in a 1982 masterpiece of his called Conceptual Outlines of Modern Economic Science. And here's what he said in part in that statement. He said, each such crisis represents a kind of branching point in history, and at such points, peoples must choose whether to be swept to ruin by refusing to change radically previous trends in policymaking, or to move humanity into an ascending pathway through appropriate transformation in policies and institutions. It has always been, LaRouche said, a relative handful who mustered the kind of dedication to a higher, long-reaching purpose, and so provided for their people more generally the quality of leadership that people required. If I can assist, LaRouche said, to strengthen such leadership within developing nations, all of us, being at once patriots and world citizens, can collaborate as a community of principle to aid in uniting our respective nations in common effort. So now the breakdown of the entire transatlantic financial system, combined with a BRICS summit, which has shifted the pace of developments radically, has telescoped decades, if not centuries, of developments into a very brief period of time. And so I'd like to say it's about time, with all due apologies to my fellow interpreters who might have a little trouble interpreting that phrase. Now, let's turn to another battle which is underway, putting aside for a moment this Argentine question, which is coming off the developments from the BRICS meeting. Because the question here, if you take stock of what has occurred at the BRICS meeting, here's what we have. First, trade in national currencies, de-dollarization, is moving very rapidly forward. This is spreading around the world almost with no way of stopping this in point of fact. And we have a situation which has been described by Russia's leading economist, Sergei Glasiev, in the following way. He recently put it as such. He said the transition to national currencies was forced to happen staggeringly quick. But in itself, the transition to settlements in national currencies is only a small element of economic activity and economic security. He's right. Second thing, the BRICS 5 became the BRICS 11 at this meeting. 47% of the world's population, which is quite significant, 36% of its GDP, which is pretty much an entirely meaningless measure of real economic activity, but for what it's worth. 80% of world oil is now controlled by the BRICS 11, and something like 72% of all rare earth materials. A third development around the BRICS' new development bank, which has begun to lend in a significant measure to BRICS member nations for infrastructure projects in their local currencies. And they have also announced that they will continue the process and expand the process of capitalizing themselves not on the dollar market. That's extremely important because the dollar market is $2 quadrillion of speculation and a cancer, which has hindered the ability of the new development bank to function at all. Now they have begun to float bonds to capitalize themselves in China in renminbi, in South Africa in rands. They will soon do that in India in rupees and also in Brazil in reals. Now they're going to have to increase the scale of their lending by 100-fold at least to actually meet the needs of requirements for heavy investment in infrastructure over the period immediately ahead. So those are some of the advances that have begun to take place. But what about the question of a new currency? This has come up repeatedly in a lot of media coverage, most of which sheds very little light on this. The question is this going to take 5 years or 10 years to develop this, to have all the technical specs worked out until maybe we can come to some agreement? No, there is no time for that, and it is not going to take that long. Now, with all of that in mind, and those concepts of LaRouche's for understanding the nature of this crisis and what must be done, let's briefly return to the question of Argentina and the emergency program which the Schiller Institute has issued around that situation, Argentina as the newest member of the BRICS. There are first a set of measures to be adopted to stop the bleeding. This simply has to be stopped. People come first. To do that, you have to declare a moratorium on the payments of the foreign debt, hundreds of billions of dollars. $46 billion are owed to the IMF. Argentina is the largest debtor of the IMFs. Argentina has paid its debt over and over and over again. And there is no reason whatsoever to not declare a debt moratorium. You cannot continue to be looted. Second, you have to stop capital flight through capital and exchange controls, including in the case of Argentina, very strict controls on exports such that all of the earnings from exports are repatriated into Argentina and not kept abroad for capital flight and speculation. Third, you have to establish a fixed parity relationship between the Argentine peso and the dollar, such that it is not devalued constantly by market speculation, and the government controls exactly how much money is traded from pesos into dollars for accepted uses of the currency, not speculative purposes. That's the first area. The second area is how to then issue urgent productive credit that's needed to get people out of poverty and to develop the economy. First, emergency government funds must be issued, as Massa, as economics minister, is attempting to do. This includes lowering interest rates, subsidizing interest rates, and so on. That's okay. It's a first step. But the problem is today, what the government hands out on a Monday is stolen on Tuesday by capital flight and speculation. That will be taken care of with the first group of measures that I mentioned. The second thing, in terms of providing urgently needed credit, is that the Central Bank of Argentina, which is an autonomous bank, meaning run by bankers, must be nationalized, just like Hamilton's First Bank of the United States, to issue credit for those things which will benefit the common good. Then you have to have strict price controls. The basis for the incredible runaway inflation of 120% a year today through devaluation and so on, that's going to be gone. But you have to apply strict price controls. And very simply, people who violate that or who try to trade illegally in interest speculation or foreign exchange speculation will be treated very harshly with jail terms and legal proceedings. The threat of such activity, as Franklin Delano Roosevelt demonstrated back during his presidency, brings an amazing amount of rationality into the thinking of bankers, which otherwise is completely absent. The other thing to provide the necessary currency and investment for the economy, having stopped the bleeding, is Argentina must continue and expand trade in national currencies with other BRICS members and using the new development bank to bring investment credits into Argentina as into other countries. And this brings us to the final and most crucial point of what's required, which is you have to launch great infrastructure projects for Argentina and for the region that will increase the productive powers of labor. There is no greater source of poverty than lack of employment in these kinds of productive activities. We have made two specific proposals to get this off the ground, working with China in particular and its Belt and Road. One is the construction of a bioceanic railroad crossing from the Atlantic to the Pacific. From Brazil, one route goes from Brazil to Peru. Another is Brazil through Bolivia into Peru. A third goes from Argentina into Bolivia over to the west coast in Peru, and so on. This will open up for development just as the Transcontinental Railroad in the United States did, or the construction of the Trans-Siberian in Russia did. That kind of infrastructure project is urgently needed. China is offering to do it. It simply should be done. That's what the BRICS should be doing, what Argentina should be doing. And then a second major great project is Argentina working with other countries to develop what is already an important capability it has in space sciences and rocketry. There is a launch base in Alcântara, Brazil, very close to the equator. It's the closest of any launch site anywhere in the world to the equator, and therefore has great advantages. Argentina and Brazil have cooperated in the area of space research for many years in the past. Argentina has tremendous capability. And now we have this tremendous accomplishment of India having landed a rover on the south pole of the moon, right in the middle of the BRICS meeting, as if to put an exclamation mark on what the actual content is of the new paradigm, the new economic architecture that's required to pull the entire global majority out of poverty and into advanced scientific development. Now, in conclusion, you have to look at what the rest of the world is doing as they look at those parts of the world where such advances have been made. They look at their own poverty, and then they look to China and the 850 million people that have been pulled out of poverty in China in 40 years. And around the global South, people are saying, if China can do it, why not we? And similarly, in terms of the scientific achievements, they look at the lack of technology, the lack of focus on their capabilities in education and science. And then they look at what India did with 100 schools training children to shoot rockets and the developments that they achieved in rocketry by landing this rover on the moon. And with the same voice and in the same breath, the global South is now saying, if India can do it, why not we? Indeed.